So welcome everybody to the second of our coffee break chats with our guest, David Gilmore from DG Legal. The topic for our chat today is data disasters part 2 and how to avoid them. And our fascinating chat with David a couple of weeks ago was on the subject of email disasters. David, what is it you'd like to talk to us about today?
Well, I'd next like to talk about phishing. Unfortunately, that's not phishing with an F, it's phishing with a PH. And just to be clear, phishing is where attackers influence others to disclose information or attempt to get you to click on a bad link that you shouldn't, etc. And phishing is carried out via email or text or phone calls. So the telltale signs of phishing are, when thinking about emails, is, well, how is it addressed to you? Do they use your actual name, or is it a generic term such as sir, madam, etc.? Is there a threat to act urgently? If you don't respond right away, is there going to be consequences? And what about the logos? And often when you get an email that might pretend it's from Microsoft, does it really look like it's come from Microsoft? Does the logo look authentic? Is the graphic quality as expected? And does it sound legitimate, or is someone trying to mimic someone you know, such as a partner, legal cashier, etc.? It's particularly common to come from a bank, not a real bank, of course. And if it sounds too good to be true, of course it probably is. So it comes back to thinking about what can we do to prevent this. Well, of course, there's got to be staff training and awareness about not clicking on links or opening suspicious attachments. We must never respond to requests for personal or financial information. I think every firm should have at least annual refresher training on this subject. And you can go even further. Some of the larger law firms actually pay third-party IT companies to carry out pretend phishing exercises to see whether or not staff respond, etc. And I think that's you know, I always believe that organization charts should be turned upside down.
It's an old one, but good one, David.
Yeah, I mean, it applies not only to data security disasters, it applies to customer service, it applies to client care. The first impression that a client gets or a customer gets about a law firm is the person that answers the phone or the receptionist, etc. So they are, I think, the most important people, but it still comes back to the answer, it has to be across the whole firm. Now, I'd like to, sorry.
Just again, perhaps a silly question, but historically, going back probably many years now, there was the theory that if you used Apple products, they tended not to open malware. Is that still was it ever valid, and is it still valid?
I think going back 15 years, my memory serves me right, that would have been the case. I remember that Microsoft seemed to be targeted. Microsoft Office products, Word and Outlook, etc. At that time, Microsoft was very dominant in the market, and there seemed to be a feeling amongst criminals that Bill Gates deserved what he got. So for whatever reason, Microsoft definitely took the brunt of the attacks, but I don't think that's the case anymore, because when we see patching, you know, the idea of security updates to cover up some vulnerability, well, you know, the Apple operating system is patched very, very regularly nowadays. So I think it applies just as much to Apple as it does to iPhones. And I said to our clients that just to be clear that this is actually Lloyds Bank calling, hang up and redial. And they stayed on the phone, passed the phone to a different person, different criminal. And this was on a Friday afternoon fraud, conveyancing, of course. And they managed to get £4 million, which was, you know, just so shocking. and the cashier resigned over it, and she was deeply distressed and depressed over this exercise.
I suppose it's a side issue to what you're talking about at the moment, David, but I've had a few clients over the years who've been done, and I don't think you can actually overestimate the amount of stress that it's caused. I mean, I can think of a couple of partners who've effectively been broken by it.
Yeah, it's scary. I went to a talk a while ago by one of the high street banks, and they played a recording of a fraud. And you sort of go, oh, we're clever people, we're not going to be caught out by this. It is so convincing, and they do all the where they get little bits of information, so they know the name of the account manager, they know the name of the finance director, they know the name of the accounts manager. And I spoke to Jim, and he said that Brenda said this is okay, and I'm and it's very convincing. I think,
how can you make law firm clients take these issues more seriously?
That's a great question, Nigel, and I think that is the number one challenge, because people often learn about what they've got to do, but unless the staff take it on board and actually do it, it's kind of pointless. And I think there's too much focus, I think, on billable targets, billable hours, etc., and not enough focus on preventing things going wrong. So I think what firms should do is to think of preventing data disasters in the same way as targets. I think it has to be a target. So how do you actually do that in practice? Well, I think it should be part of the annual appraisal. I think also when it comes to reviewing pay, there's no reason why things like data disasters and preventing them shouldn't be part of the pay discussion. And I think if that's not enough, you can even go as far as to say, put something in the contract of employment. Maybe that's going a little bit too far, I don't know. And I think what's even more important than that is if you make a mistake, then you've just got to put your hand up and tell people what's happened. We had a major case study in a webinar we did last month about data disasters, where the ex-practice manager of Tucker Solicitors talked about ransomware and what had happened to that particular firm, and they were very quick to report the matter to the ICO, the SRA, etc., and of course the police. And I think they were quite unlucky, in all honesty, because their systems were hacked, and the hack related to closed files, archived files, and but because they hadn't applied a patch in a timely fashion, they got fined £98,000. And Adam talked at length in this case study about precisely what happened and what they did. And it really sent shockwaves amongst the criminal legal aid community, because Tucker Solicitors had, and still does, have a reputation as being one of the more tech-savvy law firms in the country. They invest heavily in IT. And a lot of law firms thought, crikey, if this has happened to Tucker Solicitors, one of the biggest providers of criminal legal aid services in the country, then it could happen to any of us. And if you want to go and have a look at that case study, the webinar is available on our website. Okay, so I think ransomware is important to cover because attacks are increasing globally. I've just given the example of Tucker's, and it is the National Cyber Security Centre's #1 focus. Just under half of all UK businesses have been affected by ransomware attacks, and 3/4 of all law firms visited by the SRA in 2020 for a thematic review have been the target of a cyber attack. So it's quite stark to see the difference in percentage there. And so law firms, in terms of attack methods, what the criminals do, well, I guess there's a number of different ways. I mean, there's 4 common attack methods. Phishing emails, which we spoke about earlier. There, of course, is something called remote desktop protocol. That's where they basically start controlling your computers to get into your servers. They can also purchase access on the dark web, criminal marketplaces, and purchase your emails and passwords. And there's something which many may not have heard of called zero-day exploits. So zero-day exploits can mean one of 2 different things. It can either mean once a vulnerability has been publicized by, say, Microsoft or Apple, and then criminals rush to exploit that vulnerability before you apply the necessary patch. Or in some cases, criminals are aware of vulnerabilities before that vulnerability has been publicized. So what can you do? There is a website which I think everybody should visit, irrespective of whether or not you have fallen victim to ransomware. And that website is called nomoreransom.org. And if you go to the homepage, it will ask you, have you been infected or not? And if you have been infected, it gives you some fantastic advice on what to do. In fact, what you do is you copy and paste the text the criminal has sent you, or you tell them what type of files have been infected, and it gives you clear steps in terms of what you should do. If you haven't been infected, it gives you advice about how to prevent ransomware. Just a few tips. I think it's very common advice not to pay the ransom, because if you do pay the ransom, there's no guarantee that they're not going to do what they threaten to do anyway. And of course, if you pay ransoms, it also encourages them to carry on doing that criminal activity. The other thing you should do if you are subject to an attack is to disconnect any infected devices from the wider network so that the virus can't spread. Change any passwords that are mentioned. Check if any other accounts have been compromised. And when you're restoring a backup, you need to check to make sure it's free from malware when you are restoring your network.
That's of all the various topics we've covered, it's that scares me the most. It's bad enough when Wi-Fi is down for 10 minutes. If you've got your whole systems out for a few days, everything completely grinds to a halt. Now, I don't know about my colleagues in Mosaic, but I rely on some proprietary software to keep ransomware and malware away. How effective that is, I don't know. It's updated regularly. Is that the sort of thing that law firms are investing in, should invest in?
But I think I would go a lot further than that. One of the accreditations which I think is important for all law firms to achieve is something called Cyber Essentials, which had a very low profile until the last couple of years. But Cyber Essentials, I think if you have that accreditation, not only does it help minimize the prospect of any attacks, but it's hugely mitigating if something does go wrong. So where it came from was a few years back, it came out of concerns from GCHQ, amongst others, about the impact of cyber attacks on government and those that provide services, including legal services, to government. It focuses on a small number of controls which were identified by government that, if they had been in place, would have stopped the majority of successful cyber attacks in recent years. And the current position is direct suppliers of government legal services are required to hold Cyber Essentials accreditation. But curiously, indirect suppliers such as legal aid providers aren't currently required to do so, but some think it's only a matter of time before that changes. So what is Cyber Essentials about? What do you have to do? Well, the 5 areas are as follows. The first one, which is a really basic one, is to use a firewall. Second area is about taking care with security settings for your devices and software. The third is about maintaining access control. So you only give access to those that need it. The fourth is about what steps you've taken to avoid viruses and malware. And fifth, as we've discussed earlier, is keeping devices and software up to date. And there are 3 levels of engagement with Cyber Essentials. You can choose to just familiarize yourself with the terminology and understand what is required and go no further than that. Or you can go for basic or entry-level certification, and that is self-certification. Or for those that want to go further, you can apply for Cyber Essentials Plus certification, where an external audit company comes to visit you and tests your processes to ensure that they can. And it's very low cost. Cyber Essentials, I think you'd be looking at about £300 would be the fee if you were doing the basic level. So for the sake of £300, I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. If you wanted to go for the advanced level, I think you're probably looking at starting from about £2,000 upwards, depending on the size of the firm.
The sort of outlay, David, you'd recover through reduced insurance premiums, or at least an absence of an increase. Very quickly, I would have thought, added. So thank you very much for taking us through data disasters and how to avoid them. And to our Mosaic viewers, we'll be broadcasting again in about another 2 weeks' time.
Lovely.
See you all soon.
Bye.
Bye.